right, well, it is 6 o'clock, so I guess we will get started. Just recently, two things happened. Hurricane Francine was upgraded to a Category 2 storm with maximum sustained winds estimated at 100 miles per hour, and it made landfall across portions of southern Louisiana. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about what the forecast is looking like. Again, landfall, Louisiana coast, Category 2 storm, like we talked about. Maximum winds at 100 miles an hour. The storm's going to weaken really rapidly as it comes inland, as hurricanes often do, but still going to bring impacts to our area. It's going to be tonight and into Thursday. Damaging wind gusts, flooding, rain, tornado threat is possible for portions of the area. So here's what we got, the latest forecast advisory. This is valid as of a couple hours ago, 4 p.m. As of now, the most recent update does show it having crossed that coastline. I've had some reports of gusts upwards of 80, 85, 88 at night, maybe even close to 90 miles per hour with sustained winds close to hurricane force directly on the coastline near the levees. But it's going to be moving into a less hospitable environment as it exits the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and into land, and increasing wind shear. So you can see that the Hurricane Center track does bring that intensity down fairly quickly. And by tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be looking at what will be likely just a remnant tropical depression over northern Mississippi. So the flooding graphic, if you guys were here with us this morning, has not changed. The area of heaviest rain still expected to be across portions of central and eastern Mississippi and adjacent areas. To the west, there is still some chance for 2 to 4 inches of rain with localized flash flooding there. But the most highest impact area, you're going to be looking from a line just southeast of the Natchez Trace and point southeastward, and that's generally going to be along and east of where that's the center line of the track heads. Again, storm total rainfalls, this is for additional rainfall amounts. Generally, the highest corridor, we're looking at around 4 to 6 inches. We could see a little bit higher, particularly down for areas of the Pine Belt, where you might see a little bit more than 6. If you're in the Jackson metro area, looking around 2 to 4, and that 2 to 4 is going to cover most of the remaining area. The further west you go, the lighter your amounts will generally be. The wind threat, this has changed a little bit, not necessarily in the forecast, but we had a few questions trying to explain what our timing graphics were meaning earlier. So now that the storm has made landfall, we've sort of transitioned this graphic into being less of the onset winds, and we're trying to now show you when the strongest period of winds may be for each area. That's going to begin, the storm's going to move from south to north. So if you are, along Highway 84 corridor, midnight to 8 a.m., kind of when you may see your strongest winds with that, 5:20, 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. And if you're north of there, you're looking for some increase in your winds, generally after 9 a.m. With a relaxation as we head into the middle and late afternoon, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., the primary wind there. You'll notice that on the threat area, some of that area that had been trimmed before has now been expanded. And the reason we did that wasn't, again, because the forecast has changed. It's mostly due to increased confidence in some of those lower end risks. We had a gentleman earlier this morning who asked about Bolivar County, for example. And we did mention that time that gusts could be isolated 30 to 35, and that hasn't changed. You'll notice areas like Cleveland and are now in that solid limited area. And that's mostly, again, for those wind gusts that may be 30, 35, maybe even 40 miles per hour. They're going to be much less common the further west you go. If you're along I-55 east and south of there, the wind gusts will be more commonly higher and perhaps a little higher velocity. So right now, we've got the area blanketed pretty well. If you're in the south, you may be under tropical storm warnings. That's surrounded roughly by tropical storm watches. And the rest of the area, we have issued this afternoon wind advisories that generally take it into effect beginning tomorrow morning. That timing could be moved up a little bit depending on just how fast this thing comes in. But in general, the idea is that the winds will be up to those sort of criteria that doesn't really meet those tropical storm criteria, but still could bring down a few trees and power lines and things like that. So that's why you may see some of that yellow, that limited threat had being expanded. But again, the forecast by and large has not changed. Tornado threat graphic, this is exactly the one you guys saw earlier. This is actually a combination sort of between two of the graphics the Storm Prediction Center has issued. If you went and looked at their graphics specifically, they had these spread out sort of over 2 days into the wee early hours of Friday morning. And that's sort of the reason why this sort of stretches in this two-part piece. But in general, the threat is going to spread from the south to the north and will just be on the east side of where that center line ends up, and that's where the better moisture is going to be located. And again, primary threat is going to be the possibility for an isolated tornado or two in that highlighted risk area. And of course, there could be damaging wind gusts, as we do have those same areas delineated in that wind risk threat. So to give you guys a quick look at the visible satellite from earlier, this is just a little bit ago. This is as the storm was making landfall. So just as of maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, I made this image for you guys as making landfall in southern Louisiana. You can see it's fairly disorganized. There's no clear eye feature. It was intensifying a little bit at landfall, but again, with this sort of disorganized state, we're expecting this to begin to deteriorate fairly rapidly. And you can even start to see some of those areas where you can sort of see through the clouds and it's darker. That indicates that we could have some dry air trying to wrap into it as well. And that sort of indicates, so like I was saying, that the storm may not be able to last at high intensity for much longer. This is the infrared satellite, which shows sort of the temperatures. You can see how there's only a very small area of those really cold, those blacks and those whites, so to indicate really cold clouds. So that's going to be the area where we're expecting to see the highest impact right now. But you can see overall, the clouds are warming, which means they're not as tall, not as strong. We're already seeing indicators that should start to diminish. That's to be expected after landfall. And one more thing, we're going to look at the water vapor imagery satellite, and that just gives you an idea of where the best moisture is located around the storm. You can see off to the west over Texas and Oklahoma, pretty good dry air penetration there, and that's going to be sort of sucked into the circulation as time goes on. And you can see, if you look carefully, you have sort of the clouds sort of diverge. You have a band of clouds that moves up towards Arkansas, then you have a band that arcs across, say, northeastern Louisiana and northern Mississippi. They're not moving in the exact same direction. That's sort of giving you a little bit of a clue that there may be some wind shear ongoing, and that's impacting the storm. So between land, dry air, and wind shear, we're going to be seeing this thing diminish fairly rapidly as we go into the next several hours. But again, impacts roughly what we talked about before. The forecast has not changed despite it having come in at that category 2 level. It's not really going to be that much of a difference for us here locally. So I'll get this to play for you guys. This is just a loop of the radar at landfall. I don't know if it's going to be able to play for me, but you can kind of see where it came in here into southern Louisiana. And again, it's just starting to move into the northeast there as well. So again, one more thing, the highlights: landfall category 2, southern Louisiana. It's going to weaken fairly rapidly, but again, those impacts are still largely unchanged from this morning. We did make some adjustments to how we were messaging the timing. So if you want to look there, just make sure that you fully understand. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. Before we were talking about when they might begin, but now we're talking about when your peak impacts may be. Just make sure everyone fully realizes the adjustment that's been made there. Primary thing is going to be flooding rain potential, but there will be some wind and tornado threat. I think that's all I have